Good morning, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery and to our interesting webcam that always has different views without me touching it. There's the miracle of mindfulness and the miracle of technology. So our webcam has a life of its own. And today you have this sort of a full screen mode of the basement with its accessories in the background and the light that we use at night. Interesting. All right, welcome to Geeta. Welcome to Michael. We missed you yesterday morning. See, now we know if you and Geeta are not present, it's very noticeable. And welcome to Kelly. And hello to Denise and Edward. Good to see you, friend. We have quite a few New Yorkers present this morning. All right. And welcome to everyone else who might be watching. So I posted a little link with the sutta that we are going to be exploring this morning. So that is the translation of Bhante Sujato. And as usual, I will be reading from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, just because Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations are my favorite. Nothing against Bhante Sujato. It's all just my obsession with Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. All right. And welcome to Kyle as well. I think it's only Kelly and Geeta. Kelly is in Oxford, UK, and Geeta is in Sri Lanka, if I remember correctly. So our only two non-New Yorkers present. All right, so without further ado, we can start the morning and pay homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham namam sangham namasami. So this morning we will be reading from Anguttara Nikaya 4, the Book of the Fours, and the sutta is 245. It's a little bit longer than the ones that I normally share with you. So perhaps we'll do it bit by bit rather than reading it first all at once. So the Buddha says, Bhikkhus, the spiritual life is lived with the training as its benefit, with wisdom as its supervisor, with liberation as its core, and with mindfulness as its authority. Nice pointed statement right at the very beginning. And then it's always good to remember that when we find the word bhikkhus, so the people that the Buddha is talking to, it's not necessarily that it's just the male monks, but it's also obviously the female monks and also the lay people. So depending on the circumstances, he will be, I mean, the suttas have come to us written in a certain way, but sometimes it's more for poetic reasons or just because it has been reported that way. But anything that the Buddha says is, he speaks the Dhamma. And so the Dhamma is beyond gender, is beyond age, it's beyond race, it's beyond anything. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, in the United States of America, a female monk from Italy, with people here from Florida of European descent, and a friend here from the Philippines, who his ancestors probably were Buddhist, but he was actually raised Catholic. Yeah, so there's a whole melting pot of different experiences. Where that it doesn't really matter where we're from, who we are, all these particularities, our body shapes, our bumps on the body, whatever it is, but rather it's something that is applicable. for each one of us. And sometimes, obviously, if the Buddha is talking to monastics and we're not a monastic quite yet, we have to understand, read through the lines. What is the message that is aimed for us? Because there is a message that is universal, always, that goes beyond the particular details. So, for example, if you don't have 311 rules like me, you might go, oh, okay, well, that doesn't apply for me. But no, actually, if you're a Buddhist practitioner, you're at least on 5 precepts, I hope. Or as they like to do sometimes in some of our Thai friends, they like to be on the 4 precepts. But that's better than 0. So whatever precepts you're on, it's good to have. So let's see. Now the Buddha will explain what are these 4 things that he has shared with us. So he says, and how because is training its benefit? Here the training pertaining to proper conduct has been prescribed by me to my disciples, so that those without confidence gain confidence, and those with confidence increase in their confidence. One takes up this training pertaining to proper conduct in just the way that I have prescribed it to my disciples, keeping it unbroken, flawless, unblemished, and unblotched, so that those without confidence gain confidence, and those with confidence increase in their confidence. Having undertaken them, one trains in the training rules. Again, the training fundamental to the spiritual life has been prescribed by me to my disciples for the utterly complete destruction of suffering. One takes up this training fundamental to the spiritual life in just the way that I have prescribed it to my disciples for the utterly complete destruction of suffering, keeping it unbroken, flawless, unblemished, and unblotched. Having undertaken them, one trains in the training rules. It is in this way that the training is its benefit. And so it's obvious here that the Buddha is talking about the Vinaya, so the training rules that he has prescribed for monks. But once again, as I said earlier, he has also prescribed a lot of trainings for lay people as well. So that's why I'm saying sometimes we need to read between the lines if whatever the Buddha is talking about doesn't seem to be literally applicable to us. So of course, when it comes to the training rules, why as monastics do we have so many different training rules? And why is there actually like a progression too of training rules, between novice and full ordination, for example, which is very useful, especially if someone is not born Buddhist, is not familiar with the Dhamma and discipline. I think actually having that sort of, I've been, for different reasons actually, mainly due to the bumps on my body, my sort of levels of ordination have been delayed is not quite the right word, but slowed down in comparison to the average male monk. It's just a little bit more challenging for women to take precepts. But it's actually a good thing. It's a blessing, unless someone wants to takes it as a sort of career path. Actually, it is a blessing because we really try to understand why the hell am I going through all of this, these difficulties to take more precepts, right? Why am I actually taking bhikkhuni ordination? Sometimes when it's too easy, when it's too simple, we just take it. And then afterwards we might go like, wait, what am I doing here? This is actually a bunch of restrictions. And when I was a lay person, I could do this and this other thing. How about I just throw all of this out of the window? But when there are a few more obstacles in actually being able to practice in this way, I found the unexpected blessing of actually really thinking about it, really pondering, really trying to understand what is the purpose of all of this. And the reason why I pursued it was because throughout my practice, I have benefited so much in practicing, in taking precepts. Whenever I didn't take precepts seriously, the practice, the advancement was very stunt. And whenever I would actually put effort in practicing in the way that the Buddha instructed us, much benefit. I would get much benefit from the training. And I would start seeing, it would create the conditions. These restrictions that we see as restrictions at the very beginning actually become a blessing, because they create the conditions, once again, for the mind to look at itself and see the defilements and then overcome the defilements. So there are different reasons through which the Buddha, out of compassion, has given us these training rules. And one is, as he mentions here, for the faith of the faithless, so inspiring faith in whoever we are, the communities we're around with, the culture that we're around with, which is actually a very important aspect. So something doesn't necessarily have to be moral from the Buddhist perspective to be there as a precept, but rather it's sometimes what do the people around, what would they think if they see monastics behaving in a particular way. So it's very cultural conditioned, and there are some precepts that actually are often a bit of a question of debate, like, for example, or not practiced by different communities. So, for example, the practice of not eating whole fruit, because back in the time of the Buddha, the seeds were. There was a Jain theory. I don't remember exactly the nuts and bolts of it, but fundamentally, it's seen as a living being. So that's not the Buddhist perspective. We don't think of seeds or apples or fruit, nor do we think of onions, for example, as sentient beings. But that was the belief at the time. So if monastics were seen acting in a particular way, so eating a fruit that had not been already, quote unquote, killed. So you'll see sometimes at monasteries that they will stab the lay people will stab the apple, the fruit, before offering it to the monastics. And that comes from that particular sort of aspect back at the time of the Buddha. So I would say that actually, especially here in the United States, there's a lot of different things that can appear in a particular way to the lay people, and they will have either a good, good impression of the Sangha or a bad impression of the Sangha. But it's a slippery slope, because a lot of times then our delusion can come and we can go, oh, okay, well, people here have this sort of culture, so maybe we should be altering the precepts and whatnot. So that requires a bit of wisdom and understanding who is the audience that we're dealing with, what is the type of culture, etc. But anyway, so that is one factor, the confidence of people who don't have faith and are impressed, though, by the conduct of the monastics. And besides going to actually the details of the sort of specifics in the culture, it's just so inspiring to see actually someone who is behaving in an ethical manner. I remember when I went to my first monastery, Santa Cittarama in Italy, which is a Ajahn Chah Thai forest monastery. I was quite impressed actually by the conduct of the monastics and how they were going about their days. It was really inspiring to me. And back then, I didn't have any faith, so definitely applied, right? Whatever they were doing inspired faith in the faithless. And then, of course, as the Buddha mentioned, increasing the faith of those who have faith. We see that so often, that whenever someone, actually, whether they're monastics or lay people who are not practicing correctly but are sharing the Dhamma with others for lengthy periods of time and then do something really unethical, that is definitely not for the faith of the people who have faith already. Actually, most often than not, people will stop practicing the Dhamma because they're so discouraged and unimpressed by the people who they've been studying with, they've been following with, by the people who they've learned the Dhamma to begin with. So that's a huge responsibility on the giving end. But we should also think of it, if we're on the receiving end, as a huge responsibility of not relying on one particular teacher, not relying on one particular lineage, but rather basing our faith on the triple gem and understanding that the beings that we have in front of us are just sharing the Dhamma. And no matter how impressive they sound, they're not impressive actually in and of themselves. They're impressive because they're following the teachings of the Buddha, or if they're not following the teachings of the Buddha, they're speaking about the teachings of the Buddha. And that is what is impressive. So if we find someone who at a certain point becomes unimpressive, reveals themselves with their defilements, it's good not to throw away everything down the drain, but rather remember what we found impressive. And what we found impressive is the Dhamma. And so we can keep practicing in that way. And the Buddha highlights also in this passage how, once again, of course, he has prescribed all of these trainings for us out of compassion so that we can actually get to the point of this destroying our defilements. So I was sharing how that has been my experience so far. Not fully, not completely, unfortunately, quite yet, but actually a lot of incredible progress, thanks to practicing in accordance to Dhamma. It's terribly inconvenient at times, both for myself and for the lay people, which is one of the biggest reasons that actually most often than not we don't restrain ourselves with precepts, or we can go down that way of thinking. Like, oh, okay, well, how about poor lay people? They have to, offer the food every day and like take care of this and take care of that. Or how about maybe out of compassion for the lay people, I'm just going to start and like taking things out of the fridge without having to hassle them. And poor lay people that they always have to deal with this money. How about I start using the money myself? There's so many different lines of thinking that we can go that way. And it's actually a subject of exploration. Both as monastics and as lay people, we should always investigate, why are we doing the things that we're doing? Not just taking them at face value, but really understanding fully what is the purpose of this. And I remember when I first went to Santa Chittarama, in fact, that was the first question that I asked myself. I was like, oh, how bizarre that, these monks don't do a lot of the things. They can't do them out of these precepts. And then the immediate parallel that was drawn in my mind, having been raised in Italy, was the other monastics that I'm familiar with, the Catholic monastics, that on the flip side are completely autonomous. They grow their own food, they cook, they do all sorts of things. They purchase whatever needs to be purchased, a bunch of different things. And the second question that arose in my mind was like, have I ever met a Catholic monastic. I was like, no, I've never met a Catholic monastic. I've met so many priests. There's one priest every corner. Actually, more than one priest every corner in Italy. At least there used to be when I was living there. Tons of priests, but I had never met a monastic. And the reason why I had never met a monastic was because they were completely independent from lay people. So that was my realization, actually fascination. Initial fascination with Buddhism was how the Buddha, with just a few precepts, very simple precepts, had managed to create this connection between monastics and lay people. So between people and other people who otherwise would just be hermits. And if these precepts weren't there, it would have been impossible for me to learn the Dhamma, because these weird people would have just, done their hermit thing and not really shared with anyone except for the other hermits that live with them. Which is in fact quite actually the case in Catholicism. The form of Catholicism, I realize now that I'm a monastic and I've spoken to a bunch of different monks, is actually radically different than the Catholicism that is taught to lay people or shared with lay people in churches. So to speak, the mainstream Christianity. The way that it's practiced, it's radically different. The way that it's spoken of is radically different. And actually, oftentimes, there's a lot of overlap between Christian monasticism and Buddhist monasticism. Perhaps the wording is slightly different. But there's more things in common than there are in opposition. Actually, one of the things that I want to study is how there are several different theories that actually the Christian monastic form was a byproduct actually of Buddhist monasticism. So even though we think that only now we live in a globalized world, actually apparently in the past there was a bit of a different shade of of globalization. So a lot of different commistioni, what's it in Italian? Commissions. Sometimes I make up words because they derive from Latin, so it usually works. But I don't think I'm like a little bit doubtful. But yeah, anyway, so once again, sometimes there is, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that there is a hidden, or sometimes actually quite obvious, but it's hidden to us. It's hidden to us due to our delusion or our, assumptions, our tendency towards being practical. And the Dhamma requiring us, or the Vinaya actually, also the Dhamma, but definitely the Vinaya requiring us for us to be impractical. Sometimes as a monastic, when actually the first time, right after I had ordained, I remember I was traveling in California, and the people that I was traveling with kindly offered me lunch that day, and we went to a Thai restaurant. And I was already like embarrassed that the people that I was traveling with were offering me lunch. Say, why are you embarrassed? And that was because my entire adult life, I had identified as an independent woman. So one of my biggest challenges taking the robes on was to all of a sudden being forcefully on the receiving end. So I was already preparing myself. It's okay. And then, these people are very kind. They're offering me lunch. And then the person at the restaurant, I don't know if it was the owner or the server, he was really happy to see me, and he offered actually the lunch to all of us, myself and the lay people. And you would think, Ayya Soma was so happy. I was in so much pain, so much dukkha, which was such a bizarre state of being. I remember thinking, when is this going to end? When can I just leave? Oh, I wish I could skip lunch. Why am I the subject of this generosity? And that was the cause of suffering. I am the subject of suffering. So we tend, there are different people. Sometimes people will get into the robes and they are at the receiving end, and they're like, "Oh, this is great. This is awesome." It's pretty incredible. My experience has been the opposite, but I also realized that I was raised in a way where we're encouraged to give, but there is somewhat a kind of stigma of receiving. So it's very difficult, for example, to give a gift to my mother. My mother always says she doesn't need anything, everything is okay, and like, please don't. Please save your money. Please save. Very practical. And I realized that I absorbed that as well. I learned that as well. So it's incredibly difficult to accept things and to let go of I'm not independent anymore. By the way, full disclosure, nobody is independent, whether they have robes or not. We're all interdependent. So that is the first illusion that we have to face when we become formally dependent from others, is that there is no such thing as being an independent being. And it's a difficult truth to behold. But also the other delusion is, once again, this practicality, once again, the thing that someone is giving me these things. Or if I'm sharing the Dhamma, these people are liking what I have to say, or they're not liking what I have to say. It actually has nothing to do with who we are. We should just throw ourselves out of the window. That is just our ego and our self-obsession getting in the way. And how I got over this misunderstanding, this dukkha of being the recipient of generosity, is actually thanks to Buddhist lay people. A lot of times we think that it's only monastics teaching lay people. I think actually lay people teach monastics all the time. At least that's been my experience. And it's because I started observing how there is no embarrassment. There's no sort of shyness or bad feelings related to giving or receiving. This exchange is actually one of the most happy sort of things that happen in Buddhist temples. People bring offerings to the Sangha and encourage others to make offerings to the Sangha and rejoice in the merit. Their merit and the merit of everyone else. And the monastics rejoice in the fact that all of these people present are practicing with a beautiful mind of generosity. They have this beautiful mind of giving, this beautiful quality of mind. And so this is when it hit me. I was like, instead of, this practicality that actually, I'm young enough to be able to cook my food and clean my room and do whatever I need to do, right? It's not about that. It's not that we should only be accepting those things when we're older in age, but rather we should we become the vehicle through which people can practice generosity and nurture these incredible, unconditional qualities of mind. So not giving because someone needs it, so to speak, quote unquote, because they are, I don't know, invalid, so they can't um, work or cook or whatever it is, but rather because we rejoice in this quality of mind. It's an incredible thing. So there is no shame. You see a lot of times in Western circles, and then at the end there's like the Dana talk, and there's this like little bit creepy sort of situation where we all feel guilty and embarrassed. And by the way, it's free, but there's also the bills to pay. There's like a donation box there, but if you don't feel inclined, don't do it. It's okay. But there is the option, but forget what I said. I remember when we started Buddhist Insights and we were so poor. I was a layperson and I had to do that Dana talk, and it was kind of like that for me. I was like, oh, why do I have to say these things? It's just so embarrassing. You go to Asian temples, there is none of that embarrassment. There is none of that shame. But there is that encouragement. Hey, people, this is a great opportunity to make merit. Come. It took me so many years to learn that. These are the defilements when you're not born Buddhist. It takes so long to remove those obstructions of mind. So that's what I learned. I was like, how is it possible? So first I was like, oh, maybe the Sri Lankan people are really, really happy people. And then like the Thai people must be the Thai people that are so generous and so happy. I'm like, oh, it must be the Chinese people. And then I'm like, wait, all the Buddhist people are really happy to do this. What is the commonality here? Oh, they're practicing in accordance to Dhamma. That is what the commonality is here. They're not practicing in accordance to worldly values. And so that's when we rejoice in others. Now, whenever I see someone doing anything that is wholesome, kind, doesn't matter if it's to me, to my fellow monastics, or to other sentient beings, I rejoice. I rejoice because it's so beautiful. They're contributing an incredible wealth of goodness to the world. And the world is in a pretty bad shape. So it is remarkable that there is this goodness. We should only rejoice, no shame. And that's when it becomes a benefit, And we see on the flip side that when we stop, when we become too practical, and we're like, well, this is not terribly useful. And if we're lay people, it's even more of a slippery slope, because at least the monastics have some clear boundaries. The Buddha was very compassionate. So he gave us Parajika rules. And if we transgress the Parajika rules, there's no turning back. And one can think, oh, that's a limitation. But actually, no, that's a blessing. It's great. I'm very thankful to the Buddha. Very clear cut. But if we're lay people, then it's more difficult, right? And there are so many excuses that one can make. I really like this quote of Ajahn Chah. There was actually a monk who wanted to live at his monastery, and at a certain point he was like, oh, well, I don't really want to, I have gone beyond worldly pursuits, so gone beyond attachment. So I like to keep my money, my stash of money here, because I'm not attached to money. And it's just a convention. And it just makes life easier going from one monastery to this monastery. And he's like, okay, yeah, if this is all a convention, how about you now take a big spoonful of salt and put it in your mouth and experience it as not salty. Once you're capable of doing that, then yes, you can keep all your stash of money and experience it as just paper that floats around in the world and You're just using it as a convention. Are you capable of putting a huge spoonful of salt and not perceiving it as salty in your mouth? I love this teaching. I always recollect it when my mind starts going in that way. It's very important to also recognize that we all have the same mind. We all have the same defilements. When you read the suttas, for example, there's all these. There's both impressive, enlightened beings, and there's also like whether it's monastics or lay people struggling along the path, and we all think in the same way. Mara comes and tempts us in the same exact way. And when we start reading it, I was talking about it with Neil the other day. I start, observing this phenomena. That's when actually this passion arises in the mind, because we realize it's not unique to us. We all have the same big bunch of greed, hatred, and delusion, and same excuses that come in the mind. So we catch ourselves and we're like, oh, we don't really need to do this. Let's just throw it out. And that's when, once again, keeping this training fundamental to the spiritual life, just in the way that the Buddha prescribed it, brings too much benefit. And then we have, and how is wisdom its supervisor? Here the teachings have been taught by me to my disciples for the utterly complete destruction of suffering. One scrutinizes those teachings with wisdom in just the way that I have taught them to my disciples for the utterly complete destruction of suffering. It is in this way that wisdom is its supervisor. And I think we've spoken at length about this in the past couple of days. So once again, remembering to always, actually we also spoke about it this morning, to investigate, understand why are we doing the things that we're doing, what are the precepts, what is the purpose of these precepts, what is the purpose of our meditation practice, why do we even sit every day, what are we trying to do? And similarly, he says later, and how is liberation its core? Here the teachings have been taught by me to my disciples for the utterly complete destruction of suffering. Through liberation, one experiences those teachings in just the way that I have taught them to my disciples for the utterly complete destruction of suffering. It is in this way that liberation is its core. So remembering always, recollecting the purpose of the Dhamma Vinaya, which is the complete cessation of greed, hatred, and delusion. Unconditional happiness, nibbana, enlightenment, full enlightenment. It's possible. And it's only possible, though, if we practice in accordance to the teachings of the Buddha. There is no shortcut. We can't edit out of our delusion. I'll take this part and I'll have that. I'll skip the first course. Let me have just the dessert. No, it doesn't work that way. You got to go through the appetizer, the salad, the first course, the second course, and then you can get to the dessert. So no editorial skills are needed, but a recollection of the goal always, of the purpose. And lastly, the Buddha says, and how is mindfulness its authority? One's mindfulness is well established internally thus. In just such a way, I will fulfill the training pertaining to good conduct that I have not yet fulfilled, or assist with wisdom in various respects the training pertaining to good conduct that I have fulfilled. So this is the section. There are a few other sections that we'll go through in this part of mindfulness as its authority. So this particular section, we're seeing how the Buddha is highlighting the practice of looking at our mind and seeing what virtuous behavior is currently present and how do I nourish it, and what virtuous behavior is not currently present and I need to start getting those seeds, watering them, putting them in the soil actually before watering them, and then putting the water on it, the moisture, So then they can start sprouting and then growing into strong plants. So this is an investigation of the mind that we need to do on a regular basis, but we need to do it by recollecting the Dhamma, recollecting the teachings of the Buddha. So recollecting what is that needs to be, cultivated. And then he says, and once mindfulness is well established internally, thus, in just such a way, I will fulfill the training pertaining to the fundamentals of the spiritual life that I have not yet fulfilled, or assist with wisdom in various respects, the training pertaining to the fundamentals of the spiritual life that I have fulfilled. And so here we see the Buddha highlighting the sort of threefold training. So Sila, Samadhi, and Panya that we've been talking about in one way or the other in the past couple of days. And those are the fundamentals. And if they're the fundamentals, we can't skip one or two and get just the third one that we like. All three need to be cultivated, developed, and fulfilled. And then he says, and once mindfulness is well established internally, thus, in just such a way, I will scrutinize with wisdom the teachings that I have not yet scrutinized, or assist with wisdom in various respects the teachings that I have scrutinized. And here, my understanding is that the Buddha is talking about fundamentally scrutinizing the arising and falling away of phenomena. So fundamentally, the practice of impermanence applied to every single aspect of our life. So obviously in formal meditation, seeing our experience as impermanent, seeing the breath, how it's constantly changing, seeing the sensation of our body, how it's constantly shifting, even though our delusion at the very beginning thinks of it. I mean, we even have just one word for the breath, even though when you actually look at it, like, how could this even just be one thing? You know, the breath, even out breath, in breath and out breath, don't actually give it the exact nuance, because in every moment it's shifting. But the body, at least that was my experience of it being this solid mass of the thing that wasn't really shifting at all. At the very beginning, my mindfulness was so weak that I couldn't see any alteration, anything shifting. Pain seemed like this persistent, unshifting sensation. But the more one looks at one's experience, especially pain, it's incredible. It's constantly changing in every moment. It's very fascinating. You think that your ankle is hurting, but then actually it becomes your knee, and and then it shifts to your toe, and then it goes all over the place. Sometimes it's piercing, sometimes it's tingling, and you're like, how is it possible that all my life I thought that, my ankle was hurting? Well, it's in reality, there's always different sensations happening. And that's because it's constantly changing. So we see it there, but we can see it with anything, with our thoughts, with the things that we think bring us happiness. If we like food, if we're obsessed with food, looking at the gratification, the danger, and the escape. And the danger is the fact that it's impermanent, non-reliable. So shifting in every moment. Our experience shifting in every moment. This pandemic has been incredible in actually giving us an insight in how we take so many things for granted. Like meeting with people, just seeing more than one person in a room. Incredible. Did we even ever think before 2020 that there was such a different experience that could be had. No, it was so remote, it was so abstract, if we even ever had such a thought. So there's so many common things that we take for granted. We don't see the impermanence in them. And these are actually, we're talking on the course level. So first we start with the course level of mind, and then we go all the way to the more subtle levels of mind. I have to say, for example, being a woman in robes has been a blessing, because all of a sudden I had to do a bunch of research and understanding why my experience had shifted so much, due to the different problematics that there are in the institution of Buddhism. And I started understanding how all my life I was raised in a culture. Basically, I was raised in a matrix, the sort of matrix of patriarchy that I was oblivious to from the books that I read, the books that I've been taught, the history that is just laid through a male perspective, the things, how we are trained, educated, this huge amount of cultural conditioning that I was completely oblivious to. And actually, within Buddhist practice is amazing. I've been reading this book. Aside from the suttas, I'm in the process of reading this book. Only book that I allowed myself to read that was not in the Pali Canon. It's called The Creation of Patriarchy by Gerda Lerner, from several decades ago. She was a historian, incredible historian. So that's why it also speaks to me, because it's actually, she goes through the history of mankind as we know it in this world system and breaks down so many historical events in a way that I had never thought about before. And so actually it does a really incredible work of breaking down the self, who we think we are. And so that's why I call it a blessing, having this female body, because had I not had it, and had I not sort of entered this sort of line of research, I would have never become even aware of this huge subconscious matrix that is in my mind. So lots of good stuff. I love the Buddhist path. I'll give probably a talk on that in a few months after I finish my research. Anyway, so the Buddha says, and one's mindfulness is well established internally thus. In just such a way, I will experience through liberation the Dhamma that I have not yet experienced, or assist with wisdom in various respects the Dhamma that I have experienced. And so here, fundamentally, the Buddha is talking about when at the end of the path, we are abandoning greed, hatred, and delusion. So we don't even, once again, have to wait until the end of the path, but we are abandoning as we speak, as we go further. And there is such thing as temporary liberation, and then fully unshakable liberation. And so, of course, the unshakable liberation comes at the end of the path, but there are these temporary states of freedom from our defilements, where we can take a break and go like, wow, for this moment, there's no greed, hatred, and delusion in my mind. May it always be like this. And at certain point, then, the more effort we put in it, the more actually it will come into being. And the Buddha said, it is in this way that mindfulness is its authority. Thus, when it was said, bhikkhus, this spiritual life is lived with the training as its benefit, with wisdom as its supervisor, with liberation as its core, and with mindfulness as its authority. It is because of this that this was said. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. So these are a few thoughts on this sutta that come to mind. And let's see. I see already a few comments actually. Oh, and Gita says that she's in Canada, born in Sri Lanka. Okay, there you go. So you're basically American, even though Canadians think different. But where I come from, we're like Canada, US, look the same, eat the same. What?
I heard Canadians are nicer than Americans.
Ooh.
What?
So there are rumors that Canadians are nicer than Americans. The American president says that they're different. I say same difference, you know. And Michael says, I was off getting my second vaccination yesterday morning. Oh, wonderful. Great, great. Sadhu. Oh, Denise is getting her second shot today. Wonderful. Wow, you guys are on top of things. And Michael says, Ayya, do you ever find yourself railing against the special training rules for female monastics? The Buddha did say we can dispense with the minor training rules not applicable to current times and conditions. But Venerable K, I don't know who Venerable K is, said, because the Buddha was not specific about which are minor, monastics must adhere to all precepts. Perhaps it's time to re-examine this issue. Yeah, so this is the sort of ongoing, the Buddha says, lay people like to argue about material things, and us monastics like to argue about views and ideas and, you know, all the abstract things in the world. So I am currently not railing against special training rules for female monastics, if you're talking about the Patimokkha. Also because I'm still in the process of studying it. So what I like to do in terms of Dhamma Vinaya is never rule out anything, but rather take everything as a working hypothesis and see the effects in my mind. Is this leading, practicing in this way, is it beneficial? Is it leading me towards the cessation of suffering, or is suffering increasing? And that is also actually the instructions that the Buddha gives, by the way, in terms of the Vinaya. Can't remember the exact sutta, but it's actually in the Anguttara Nikaya. I was reading it a few weeks ago. So I was like, oh, great. I've been like practicing this way. It was my pat in the back moment. And so actually, to be quite frank, also certain sexist passages that one can find in the Pali Canon, I didn't refute them straight away. I mean, I was disappointed that they were there at the very beginning, but I decided as a stance not to go by my likes and dislikes, but rather to take it as a working hypothesis and to compare it with ask questions to practitioners, try to understand if I was seeing something that was in contradiction with other cardinal principles of Dhamma. How could it be? How is that possible? You know, and that's also the advice that the Buddha gives us, to understand what is the difference between Dhamma and Adama. So getting back to your question in terms of the monastic precepts, right now my way of thinking is actually sometimes we're asking ourselves the wrong questions. So we sometimes take these precepts as we have our sort of view of, even though as monastics, actually, our first recollection should be, I'm no longer part of the social hierarchy. The truth is we've spent most of our life in society that has a specific hierarchy, whether it's class, caste, race. There are so many different specifics in that change in different parts of the world. So our mind keeps on going in that direction. And then they're seen as And we ask questions like, oh, well, why? We tend to see things as certain monastic precepts as putting women in a subordinate position towards males. And that is true if we actually take the monastic institution as being a hierarchical institution. That is absolutely true. If the monastic institution is the equivalent, the Buddhist monastic institution is the equivalent of the Vatican, then yes, we have the same exact problems, more or less, than the Vatican. Women are subordinate to men. It's pretty much any religion. So I didn't ordain for that. I was never into organized religion. And one of the things that I really liked about Buddhism was that it's a disorganized religion. So that's not the way that we're practicing here at Empty Cloud Monastery. I'm not interested in being in any type of hierarchy, but I am interested in practicing in accordance to the way that the Buddha prescribed. So that's my current exploration, is how are these precepts supportive towards liberation? And for example, say there's a precept, for example, of asking for admonishment to the bhikkhu sangha, that the bhikkhus don't have the equivalent, right? Or or admonishment, like words of encouragement every 2 weeks. I'm like, well, that's great. Actually, it's kind of like the opposite problem should be the problem should be in the line of Dhamma of the bhikkhu sangha, that they don't have that opportunity with the bhikkhunis. I'm quite happy that actually there is that opportunity, to be in connection with the bhikkhu sangha. And honestly, I have a more holistic idea of the sangha. I think the Buddha created the sangha. It's Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. It's the triple gem. It's not the fourfold gem. And of course, there's different sets of rules. Most of them overlap, by the way, between the bhikkhu sangha and the bhikkhuni sangha. But I think it's an incredible, beautiful thing for the two sort of two faces of the coin to be interconnected. So actually a lot of the problems that people see in the Bhikkhuni Vinaya, I think it's actually a problem of the Bhikkhu Vinaya. So we should add some rules if we need to add some to alter things. People get so focused, so wrapped up with, oh, why do they have that precept? I'm like, why don't they have that precept? Let's talk about that. Poor bhikkhus. So anyway, in the future, I'm sure I'll have a different idea. Getting to the minor training rules, I think each community needs to make that decision, which is why the Buddha was so compassionate in giving those instructions. And our duty, both as monastic and as lay people, is not to judge others, but rather see what is suitable for me to practice and what is suitable for others to practice, and support them in their decisions. And Giovanna says, back to the apple as sentient beings. I missed the seeds can be new life when dried and planted. So that is not a Buddhist view. That is a Jain view. It's just that back in the time of the Buddha, those views were pervasive. So that's why the Buddha created a precept. And that actually goes into the minor rules. So you'll see different communities will not really follow that rule. Another rule is, for example, not riding in vehicles. That is not practiced by the majority of monastics. I would say 99.9% of monastics these days, because it would be very unpractical to do so. But it made sense back in the time of the Buddha, where both vehicles, actually, they were not motor driven, but they were actually There were animals that would carry people around. So it's a sentient being. And also, it was a luxury. So you don't want to be, it would be the equivalent of going around in a private jet these days. Not very humble, not inspiring much faith, is it? And Gita says, and the analysis of the monastic and the link to the lay followers is wonderful. Oh, you're so kind. Buddha's wisdoms. Yes, yeah, the Buddha, this is what I love about the Buddha. Since I'm an aversive type, I tend to always look for flaws and drawbacks and things that are not quite logical. And that's where my faith in the Buddha comes, because I can't find anything flawed. And when I think I find something flawed, actually it's my mind that is flawed. That's when I say that he gives me a slap in the face. And then I realize I'm like, oh, wow, such a genius mind, incredible mind. Yeah, everything is the fruit of an enlightened being. So not being able to find a flaw creates a lot of Dhamma Sukha in my mind. It's the same with Ajahn Chah. Like whenever I read his teachings, I don't find any flaws, so my mind rejoices. Oh, hello, Shadow Label. Good to see you. And Tina says, keyword is training. Some modern lay teachers only talk about being with things as they are, letting go and letting things be. It seems to require observation and action together. Correct. Yes. Yeah. Once again, normally the editing is done out of preference. So it goes, it's counterproductive. And Michael says, quite right, but I think this brings up the spirit vis-a-vis the letter. I'm not sure, you were probably referring to something that was said a little bit earlier, but I'm not sure. Hello, Stacy, good to see you. All right, well, I hope this was useful, and I think we're at the end. Actually, I'm 5 minutes late. Monte Sudaso would be pointing this out. Not proper, but I'm Italian. Time is a convention. All right, so we can end the morning with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll be meeting again this evening. Bring all your questions on mindfulness and related to mindfulness, and we'll have a nice discussion tonight, hopefully. You have a great rest of the day, evening, or night.